All right, so there's been a lot of questions about rescue swimming and people underwater, and in the last few weeks there have actually been a number of these calls, and there's been an interest in confirming what our practices are and how we need to approach these things. So the first thing that we want to emphasize is that for regular operations companies that aren't trained in rescue swimming, the rule is that nobody goes underwater. So there's no duck diving. And then for the special operations companies, that they are the ones that perform the duck diving or the subsurface water work. So that tells us that we need to define the PPE for people that are in the water. So anybody that enters the water needs to have a PFD on. So it doesn't matter who you are, what company you're on, you're going to need to have a PFD. All companies are assigned 4 PFDs, so that shouldn't be a problem. And then the guys that will be doing the rescue swimming portion, they have special PFDs that have a lighter buoyancy that allow them to go subsurface. Anybody that is going subsurface needs to have a PFD, mask and snorkel, and a knife and fins if they prefer. And then I would also add that especially for the first person in the water, that will be the oriented swimmer, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. They need to take a buoy with them, a buoy that's marked for water depth. And I'll go through that in a few minutes here. So I want to talk about 2 different scenarios. And so you get called out for a water rescue alarm, a lot of resources coming, and these incidents can come in many forms, but 2 are very common. One being a witnessed submersion, and the other one being an unwitnessed submersion or an unwitnessed missing person. And so let's talk about the unwitnessed missing person first. An example of that is moms at Emmelong Park. Kids are playing out in the water. She falls asleep, wakes up, and one of her kids is missing, and the other kids don't know where they are. Maybe they're in the water, maybe they're at the snow cone stand, maybe they're in the bathroom, it's unknown. So approach that like you would any other lost or missing person incident. We need to establish an initial planning point. That most often is the point last seen, and so it may be that point last seen is in the water. But you need to search a 300-meter area around that initial planning point. So whether it's a lost person in the greenbelt or a lost person at the water's edge, you want to search that 300-meter area. Something like 90% of people are found within 300 meters of an initial planning point. So need to search that area both ground and in the water. So what can a non-special operations company do water-wise? That's where this shore-based or surface search comes into play. And so if you see here, this simulates the terrain of the ground, and then you've got the water depth as it goes along. So you can space people out along the terrain, and space them out to where if you've got a few feet between the 2 of you, and then have them space out until you have somebody that's swimming, and then you can just sweep the shore. And so you can identify that pretty far out in the water. You could probably get out 12-15 foot with people spaced out, and you can sweep a pretty big area of the water and be able to identify anything that's subsurface. And the people that are walking along would feel things hitting their legs, that kind of stuff. If the water clarity is really good, then people on the surface, again, PFDs on, even better if they have masks, can put their face in the water and search from the surface of the water into the water. And so you may be able to, even in very clear water, be able to push that out. So in a lot of the areas around Lake Austin, you may be able to do a surface search pretty effectively. And then all the areas that are ground-based, search all the bathrooms, fill out the missing person questionnaire so that you can identify a lot of key points that you're going to be looking for the missing person. So that's the unwitnessed search. Now the second one is the witnessed submersion. So You've got some people out playing in the water, they witness their friend, their family member, whatnot, go underwater. So you show up, everybody wearing the appropriate PPE. The first thing that we need to do is start asking some questions. Where are they? How long have they been in the water? Those kind of things. It's been emphasized that rescue mode, you're going to be in one of three modes: search, rescue, recovery. So you'll be in rescue mode for the first 20 minutes, and that 20 minutes starts at the keystroke of the receipt of the call through to 20 minutes. And at the end of that 20 minutes, you would transition to rescue mode, unless command identifies a reason to push that envelope a little bit. But 20 minutes from first keystroke. So as that first company arrives, we need to identify our initial planning point, just like we did in the missing person scenario. And the way that we typically find that initial planning point is through what we call triangulation. And we really want first-in companies to perform good triangulation. When the first-in companies do a good job of establishing that initial planning point, do a good triangulation, get an oriented swimmer in the water, when those things get done well on the front end, then the search portion of it that comes later can be much, much more efficient and effective. So how does that triangulation work? We've kind of got a quasi picture here. So we four-person crew, officer is going to be standing in the middle. You've got multiple reporting parties. I would take one of my members, make sure that they have their buoy that's marked with the red and green line, and immediately have them enter the water. Take my other two members, each with 2 cones each off of your rig, and send them with separate witnesses. And we want to try to separate those witnesses early on so that they don't collaborate on their story. We want their independent thought about where these people might be, or where this point last seen is. And so separate those witnesses. One crew member goes with a witness, a second crew member goes with another witness. The officer may wrangle a couple of others. And those crew members with their cones get separated out. Your oriented swimmer swimming out in the water. And the crew members that are with the witnesses are hollering out to the oriented swimmer, the swimmer in the water, and telling them to go left, right, and trying to get them in the position that the witness believes the person went underwater. It's likely that you may get some conflicting reports from different witnesses. An officer is just going to have to make a decision. And that decision may be based on one witness being a little bit more firm and a little bit more assertive, and that they really do believe that that's where they are, and another one may be a little more unsure. Well, I think that's about where they were, those kind of things. So you're just going to have to use all your spidey senses to make the best decision that you can. With all of that collective information, once the oriented swimmer in the water is in the place that we believe the person went underwater, that is our initial planning point. And from there, we want to drop the lead weight on the end of the buoy, let that H buoy spin, and let the lead weight go to the bottom. The buoy should be marked with green cord for the first 12 feet and red cord for the 18 feet after that. And so if you're in 12 foot of water or shallower, then that is good rescue swimming depth for the rescue swimmers that are responding. If it's 12 feet or deeper, so you're in the red zone on the buoy, that's not so good depth for the rescue swimmers. And so that feeds into your risk assessment. So once you get that buoy dropped and you get water depth, that's when you need to give a subsequent radio report. And so the officer would then, if they're in command, all units from command, or if somebody else is taking command, then your unit or command from your unit designation, and you want to give that subsequent radio report. You want to let everybody know that triangulation is complete. You have an oriented swimmer in the water. Water depth is whatever it is, and they're however far away from shore they are. And so that will give incoming companies the information that they need to begin to make decisions. If you're in the red zone and it's too deep, then the rescue swimmers know that it's going to be a non-swimming kind of call. Command knows they need to get dive teams en route, those kind of things. So it really helps the incident by giving that good quality subsequent radio report. So let's talk about risk profile. So there are, for the divers that are going to go underwater, there are 3 significant hazards for that diver. The first hazard is swimmer fatigue, and so our rescue swimmers, when we're looking for people that are good in the water, we're looking for strong swimmers, not just fast swimmers, but strong swimmers, swimmers that can go underwater, pull weight off the bottom, are really good strong swimmers, not just fast. The second hazard is entanglement subsurface. So that's your debris, down trees, fishing line, anything that's underwater that's entanglement hazard for the diver. And the third one is what's called shallow water blackout. And that's one that's often unknown by a lot of people. We've all done it as a kid where you're at the surface of the pool, you're about to go try to dive down and touch the bottom. So what do? You go, and then you take a deep breath and you duck dive down. Well, you've just hyperventilated and you've built up a carbon dioxide load in your bloodstream. And if you do that multiple times in a row, you can actually pass out underwater, and they call that shallow water blackout. And so we want to prevent that. And a couple ways that in rescue swimmer school they teach to prevent that is, 1, don't hyperventilate before you dive. And 2, you need some time to blow that carbon dioxide off. Whenever we're going to talk about rescue swimming tactics in just a second, but whenever we talk about those tactics, you're going to have one person underwater and one person not underwater. The person that's not underwater, they are the safety for the guy that's underwater, but they're also blowing off that carbon dioxide. And so that's their recovery time so that we can fend against shallow water blackout. All right, so that's our 3 dive hazards. Now then, once the rescue swimmers arrive, we've got our oriented swimmer in the water, we've got our buoy dropped to the bottom, triangulation's complete, we're managing all of that. We get swimmers heading out to our oriented swimmer. That oriented swimmer needs to stay on the water the whole time. The buoy will have a tendency to float downstream based on wind or current. And so that oriented swimmer, they're constantly looking back at the cones. And the 2 cones that in this case you can see here, oriented swimmer, are 2 cones that we set out in the distance that one of our crew members sets with our witness. They're set in line with each other. So our oriented swimmer can look back to shore and see those 2 cones. If you forgot your cones or you don't have them, medical bags, PFDs, trash cans, like all sorts of improvised ways to accomplish that. But the oriented swimmer can always look back to shore and make sure that they're in that point last seen. And so that's the point of that, of setting the cones or your improvised methods out there. So that oriented swimmer, once we get the rescue swimmers, the people that are trained to do the rescue or the subsurface duck diving, they're going to swim out to the oriented swimmer. And this oriented swimmer job is a good one that a reg ops company could do because they're not going subsurface. And so a rescue swimmer swims out. The first thing they're going to do is a recon dive. And so they're going to tuck under, head to the bottom. When they do that recon dive, they're looking for 3 things. They're looking to confirm the depth. They're wanting to know how good or bad is the visibility and what are the bottom conditions. And so these elements of the recon dive, coupled with these 3 dive hazards, those are what builds your risk profile. These are the things that you've got to consider. These are the things that as you're thinking risk benefit that you're working with. So some things to consider there. If you get that recon dive done and he comes back up and he says, lots of debris down there, trees everywhere. As you're thinking about that, you're 15, maybe 18 minutes into the 20-minute rescue mode time. You've got really terrible bottom conditions. Maybe visibility is bad. Maybe weather's cold. All of those things feed together into this risk profile. And maybe you just decide this isn't, the risk isn't worth the benefit because the risk is tangling somebody up in these terrible bottom conditions. Alternatively, if you get that recon dive done, great visibility, sandy bottom, good, strong, witnessed location, so our initial planning point's really solid. You've got some good, strong swimmers in the water. The other day they pushed rescue mode for 30 minutes instead of 20 because they used this risk profile coupled with all the additional information and pushed that envelope a little bit. Again, to reiterate, policy is that unless you're trained in rescue swimming, that you don't go subsurface. All right, so what are the rescue swimmers going to do? So we get our recon dive done. They come back up to the top. They report that back out. The command's going to make a risk-benefit decision. Do we continue on with the operation? If we decide that yes, we're going to continue the operation, what does that look like? What can we expect the rescue swimmers to do, and how can we support that? So the first thing that they're going to do with limited number of swimmers is what they call a vicinity search. And so if you've got an oriented swimmer that knows how this goes down, great. Otherwise, you may get a rescue swimmer that's trained in how to do this to direct it. But the way this goes down is the first 1 to 2 swimmers get out to the oriented swimmer. The oriented swimmer is going to give them a direction to go. That rescue swimmer is going to dive down. He's going to kick along the bottom for 3 kicks, come back up. As he's coming back up, hand over their head, other hand holding the face mask so it doesn't get dislodged, the one over their head. Make sure that they don't hit the bottom of a boat or the bottom of a buoy or any sort of debris that's on top of the water, and then comes back up, and they'll pop back up above the water about 3 kicks away from the oriented swimmer. Once they've done that, they're going to swim back to the oriented swimmer. Oriented swimmer is going to come around the clock, if you will, and send them on a different direction. Duck down, swim out, 3 kicks, back to the surface, and then back to the oriented swimmer. So whether you got 1 swimmer doing that or 2, you're going to work your way around that clock dial until you've completed that circle. Once you've completed that circle, hopefully we've got more swimmers on the way and we can transition to a line search. Otherwise, we may continue the vicinity search until we get a couple more swimmers in the water. So that's the vicinity. So what can reg ops guys or non-swimming trained guys do in this setting? Oriented swimmer, you could do that. Set your triangulation, and then you've got your company officer making sure everybody's wearing appropriate PPE. All right, once we get a couple of additional swimmers, we will transition to a line search. The way a line search works is you're going to have a line boss. That line boss, in best case, is at water's edge and or maybe about waist deep in the water, so that they're not affected by any water movement or wind out in the water. Then you're going to get a line of swimmers, and you'll have an end cap. Now, this end cap can be a swimmer, it could be a boat, it could be a rescue board, it could be somebody just floating out in the water. But this end cap is an important piece. How many ever swimmers you have in the water, they're going to count off 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So you hear the line boss count off 1, 2, 1, 2 all the way down. Once we've got them counted off, the line boss will say ones dive. The ones will tuck under, dive to the bottom, 3 kicks out, and they'll pop back up. As they're working their way out, the line boss will work their way downstream a little bit to the place where they anticipate the swimmers are going to pop up. Once the swimmers start popping up, the one that pops up furthest back, the line boss is going to pull everybody back to that spot. Once all of those guys have popped up, the line boss will say 2s dive. The 2s are still back here at our starting point. The 2s will duck down under, 3 kicks out, and then back to the top. And then the line boss will get them all back in line. Once they're all back up, the 1s dive, the 1s will dive out, line boss works his way down. Once the 1s are back up, the 2s dive. And that process will work its way through. And so you've always got 1 swimmer up, 1 swimmer down, so you've got some backup safety going on there, but you're also blowing off the carbon dioxide so that you can avoid the shallow water blackout. So best case, this line boss is standing in shallow water. Otherwise, he could be on a board, he could be in a boat, he could be floating in a PFD, but any of these things. So how far upstream is most of the time how you're going to set up your line search. How far upstream do we set our swimmers? So the generic rule is that whatever your water depth is, and we know that because we've dropped our buoy, so it's going to be at least 12 foot or less. Whatever that water depth is, that times 1.5 is how far back you're going to set your line search. So if it's 10 foot, you're going to back the line search up 15, and you'll start your line search there and work your way through. And with the same thing goes left and right of our point last seen, or our initial planning point. We want to try to get 1 times the water depth all the way around that. And so we'll set our line search up to do that. So again, what can non-swimmers do in this setting? Well, they can be our oriented swimmer for sure, because there's really no work to be done here other than making sure they're staying on that initial planning point. They could be the end cap, so we could have a rescue board out in the water. We could have somebody in a PFD floating out and be in the end cap. They could be managing the board that the line boss is either sitting on or hanging on to, making sure that the board stays in a good oriented position. So a lot of things that can be happening here. Other things that non-swimmers could do is they could have boards in place out in the water, so if we do pull somebody up off the bottom, we can immediately roll them onto a board and get them to shore. We should have a company standing by at the water's edge, ready to do CPR. So at least one company at the water's edge. And if there's any distance between where the ambulance is and where the water's edge is, there should be some consideration to some sort of an evacuation group of some kind to move the casualty from point A to point B if we do get resuscitation. So I'm going to circle all the non-swimming spots. So we've got our oriented swimmer here already circled. We've got our triangulation members. We've got our officer here in the middle setting the triangulation up. We've got our end cap, which could be somebody floating in the water on a board. We got an oriented swimmer, and then non-swimmers can do this line search. So a lot of stuff that we can do without having to go subsurface. The last thing I just want to reiterate is that setting this triangulation up in the beginning and doing this well, getting the buoy dropped, getting an oriented swimmer in the water, those things take time. And you're going to feel the pressure of the people that are on scene telling you their family members underwater, those kind of things. These things take time, but they're critical in setting up the efficiency of the rest of this. So if the first companies do a good job of setting the oriented swimmer triangulation and giving that subsequent radio report, identifying that triangulation is done, that we have an oriented swimmer in the water depth is whatever it is, and however far from shore they are, the incident's going to be set up for success. All right, so we're going to do a quick triangulation drill. You could do this anywhere. We're going to do it in our parking lot. We're simulating that along this line of vehicles right here, all the way over to here is the shoreline, and then everything back this way is in the water. Those are our two reporting parties. They kind of picked a spot somewhere out in the water here, and this is our crew of 4. We got our officer here on the left and our crew over here on the right, and we're going to execute triangulation. So you've got 2 crew members with 2 cones each, 1 crew member with a buoy that's marked with our 12 and 18 foot depths. Initially make contact with the witnesses. You may have a bunch of witnesses, you may only have 1, but immediately want to separate them. Here we've got 1 firefighter with a set of cones who starts working with a reporting party. Here we've got another person. We start to send our oriented swimmer in the water. He should have a PFD on and take the buoy with him. He's receiving direction from our crew members who are talking to our our witnesses. There needs to be good communication between the oriented swimmer and our crew members so that we can get the oriented swimmer in the right spot. A couple of key points is you want to make sure that between you and the oriented swimmer that there is a good line of sight, that there's no obstacles between you and the swimmer.
You look like you're in line there. That's good. Okay.
The distance between the 2 triangulation points can be really wide or fairly narrow. The 2 cones in parallel allow to identify the depth. The officer is coordinating the whole effort, and if there's any dispute between the witnesses, then the officer has to make a firm decision on which witness is the most believable and where we're going to decide to drop the buoy. I'm going to make a quick point here. If you only have a single witness, you can get that single witness on the shore, put your first cone in place, that's cone 1 on the screen. Put the second cone right behind it, directly in line with the oriented swimmer. Have the oriented swimmer back further out in the water until the witness says that they're in the right spot. Then a second firefighter with a second set of cones can set cones 3 and 4 on the screen. They don't have to be oriented or directed by a witness. They just need to be in line with a swimmer that's in the water based on the information from the single witness. So if you only have a single witness, you can still do triangulation. So once the officer's happy, the oriented swimmer's in the water in the proper spot, he'll tell him to drop the buoy. In the real water, you'll just let the buoy go, it'll start spinning.
6 feet.
So now the officer knows the water depth, he knows how far from shore he is, and he should give a subsequent radio report. That subsequent radio report will identify that triangulation is complete, that we have an oriented swimmer in the water, how deep the water is, and how far from shore they are.